I am delighted to report that I have joined as a visiting scholar the Declaration of Independence Center for the Study of American Freedom at the University of Mississippi. The center offers educational opportunities, speakers, internship, and reading groups for the University of Mississippi community. It is named in honor of the United States founding document, which constitutes the nation as a political community and expresses fundamental principles of American freedom, including in the recognition of the importance of Judeo Christian values in shaping American exceptionalism. Dedicated to the academic and open minded exploration of these principles, the center exists to encourage exploration into the many facets of freedom. It will sponsor a speaker series and an interdisciplinary faculty research team. If you'd like to learn more about the center, please visit OleMiss, that's olemiss.edu/independence/. Hi, everybody. This is Gad Saad. After a bit of a break, we were away with the family in Bermuda. Then I had a speaking engagement in Seattle. I'm back in my home base, and my first guest post family vacation is Adam Szetela, he shares my alma mater. He is a PhD in English from Cornell University, and he was kind enough to put immediately above his beautiful head a copy of a book. I hear that the author of that book is an incredibly wise and good-looking man. Thank you for putting him up. Adam, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
It's a
Excited to
pleasure
be
to
here.
have you. I wanted to begin by letting people know about your book. First book, correct?
First book, yeah.
Yes, so here it is. That book is dangerous! Exclamation point. How moral panic, social media, and the culture wars are remaking publishing. So we'll do a deep dive into that. But perhaps first we can begin, Adam, with tell us about your time at Cornell. Tell us about your PhD at Cornell. What was your dissertation on? And we can then delve into your book.
Yeah, for sure. So I started at Cornell in fall of 2020, and I come from an English background. But one of the reasons I went to Cornell over some of the other universities that had accepted me is I've always been really into interdisciplinary work. I know you yourself are as well. And at least when I came into Cornell, I think it might have changed since then. But I was promised the freedom to take graduate coursework in any field I wanted. So I did my graduate coursework in English, but also sociology, social psychology, history, American studies. And yeah, for the 5 years I was at Cornell, I focused on book censorship, specifically in the United States and specifically in the age of social media. So my dissertation research was essentially the book that you're holding in your hands right now.
Ah, okay, wonderful. So your doctoral supervisor would have been though housed in, literature or comparative literature or something like that?
Yeah, she's actually an ethnographer who doesn't really do literature stuff, but she had a co-appointment in English. And then I also had a sociologist on my dissertation committee, as well as someone who does interdisciplinary work.
Yeah, well, I'm of course, as you said, it's music to my ear to hear the word interdisciplinary because I also went to Cornell. I mean, for several reasons, but one of which is precisely because you could sort of shape your program in any way that you wanted. And of course, my academic career has been defined by the fact that I don't take disciplinary boundaries seriously. Is this something that is frequent? I mean, a common amongst PhDs in literature, or are they typically much less likely to have training in sociology and in psychology and so on?
Yeah, so on the one hand, everyone sort of in English, especially graduate students who have an eye towards the job market, they all describe themselves as interdisciplinary. But often what that looks like is, say they read a Marxist geographer like David Harvey, and then they analyze place in a novel. They call that interdisciplinary.
Yeah.
I'll let your listeners decide whether that's in a display. There's no geographers citing people in English, and it's a very one way. On the other hand, I would say the people that do kind of what I do, which is empirical literary studies, like I will use social experiments, I use surveys, I use interviews, I've used focus groups in my research. At least when I was at Cornell, I didn't actually know anyone else who did that, and I think I've really only come across maybe like one or two people over the past 5 years who come out of an English background who do that. I would say for the most part, as soon as you start using words like empirical or hypothesis or testing, people in English sort of like get uptight because that associates you with something resembling science and whatever whiteness and I mean, you know what I'm talking about. So
And
yeah,
we sh and I guess they're proud of the fact that they are in the humanities and therefore distinctly different from applying the scientific method to whatever interest they wish to pursue, which of course, I mean, pisses me off to no ends because you've probably heard me mention this before, but in case you haven't, let it be the first time, but certainly some of my listeners and viewers have heard me say one of my favorite books of all time is a book by one of my intellectual heroes, E.O. Wilson from Harvard, who recently passed away. He wrote a book in the late 1990s called Consilience, Unity of Knowledge, where consilience basically refers to exactly that, trying to build bridges between different endeavors of human import. And in his case, he was arguing that the way that we achieve consilience by bridging the humanities, the social sciences, and the natural sciences is, in his case, he was arguing through evolutionary theory. And so, again, I think, irrespective of which field you're in, you could be a Shakespearean scholar. You could benefit from applying the scientific method to some of your work. You could use content analysis to study the actual content of the text, right? It doesn't all have to be interpretive stuff. Earlier, you mentioned Marxist geographer, which kind of leads me to the next question. Typically, when you do analyses in literature, it's through a Marxist lens or a Foucault lens or a feminist lens or a
for sure.
postmodernist lens. Of course, we mentioned this before we came on air. Darwinian literary criticism tries to apply the evolutionary lens to study great works of literature, precisely because the idea is that what moves us about literature is that it appeals to certain fundamental universal themes. Is this a field that you're at all familiar with? And if yes, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so it's a field that I assume you're probably way more familiar than I am. So as you pointed out, I have 4 degrees in English, and getting a degree in English, at least in like 2000s on, is really here are the conceptual frameworks and try to make sense of literature within those frameworks. So it could be Marxist, it could be feminist. Increasingly, it's like trans or queer or what
Yes.
have you. At no point in accumulating 4 degrees in English was I ever assigned a Darwinian literary theorist. The only one I know off the top of my head whose work I could actually speak to in some detail is Jonathan Gottschall,
Of
who
course.
wrote The Professor in the Cage. He's been on, I don't know if he's been on your podcast. He's been on Rogan's
He
podcast.
hasn't. He's been on Rogan. Yes.
Yeah, so he's I think Jonathan's a super smart guy, phenomenal writer. When he went on the job market, he had, a very impressive CV. His work was being lauded by Steven Pinker and other, like serious intellectuals, both within English and outside. And from my understanding, he got absolutely torched on the job market. Aside from the fact that his work is not trying to like accuse a text of racism or sexism, which is sort of like how you got a tenure track job. Um, he was saying like let's ground our analysis in science and evolution, which is not a social construct. So I mean, when you are trying to make a career in English, that's the equivalent of holding a sign that says, don't hire me. So yeah.
Do you see any improvements? By improvement, I mean lesser dogmatism in those fields, or we haven't yet reached the apex of lunacy, which of course you cover in your book.
No, I mean, for the most part, I mean, I have a few colleagues who I can work with. My dissertation committee was very supportive, really great people. But for the most part, I mean, I think of all the corners of academia, even worse than I know the social sciences get a lot of heat. I actually think the humanities and English is where you find some of like the most outlandish anti-empirical nonsense. And from my understanding, no, there has not been any sign that that is going away. Like I know, if you watch South Park came back on the air a few weeks ago and they declared woke is dead. And like, I agree, woke is dead in certain corners, most notably the Oval Office. It seems very much dead. But, if you go to Harvard English department, Yale English department, if you look at who they're hiring, who they're admitting for grad students, if you look at sort of the endless production of new victimology scholarship, I mean, it's just going on as business as usual.
Wow. I'm going to come back. Well, I'm going to do a deep dive shortly to this beautiful book. But before I do this, since I've got a literature expert, here is one thing that pisses me off about my reading discipline. I'm a voracious reader, have been my whole life, but I'm almost exclusively a nonfiction reader.
Hmm.
Not 100%, but let's off the top of my head, let's go 95% of all books that I've ever read have been nonfiction. And that pisses me off because I know that I'm losing out by not having explored more fiction. Because again, to our earlier point about Darwinian literary criticism, even if I were simply interested in reading literature because of my interest in evolutionary theory, I should be doing that because great literature is exactly speaking about these universal shared human experiences shaped by our biological heritage. So if I were to ask you, and forgive me if I'm putting you on the spot, off the top of your head, God, Saad, we need to remedy your lacuna when it comes to reading fiction. Here are 10 books that you must read in the next 5 years. What would Dr. Szetela tell me?
Oh man, that's a tough question because like you, I would say I read 95% nonfiction.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm looking at my library right now. I mean, I probably own 10 novels, to be honest.
Wow.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate. I've been kind of able to, like, my book is not a close reading of a lot of text. It's more of like a sociological study of
Right.
publishing. That's kind of what I'm interested in. But so off the top of my head, I mean, I'm gonna come off like a toxic male or whatever with these
Yes.
book recommendations, but I like a lot of the late 20th century transgressive fiction. So a lot of these novels actually got adapted into movies. So like Chuck Palahniuk's Fight Club, I think is like a really interesting sociological book that's also well written. I love Bret Easton Ellis's American Psycho. I love Hunter S. Thompson's Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. I like A Clockwork Orange. And the fact that I haven't mentioned a single book published after like 1994 also speaks to, I think, something that, comes, I didn't focus on it in my book, but it certainly tracks with my book, which is in many ways, American publishing has become incredibly feminized in terms of what it
Yes.
accepts for publication, in terms of who it publishes. So, like, if Chuck Palahniuk was taking Fight Club to Penguin Random House in 2025 as a new author, there's a 0% chance that book would be published.
The fight scenes would be two men watch Bridget Jones' Diary, and the one who cries more is the one that wins the fight. Would that be sort of the new adaptation of Fight Club?
Yeah, it would be that, or maybe you keep the first 40% of Fight Club, but then the remaining 60% is like the protagonist decides to like go back to college and then he learns that he's really toxic and apologizes to everyone and self-flagellates.
Uh, I'm sure you're familiar with my series of self-flagellation videos. Yes?
Oh yeah,
Oh, yeah. Okay.
yeah, big
The, the,
fan.
mo the most recent one, I, uh, I learned, through important indoctrination and brainwashing, that Lizzo's more beautiful than Sydney Sweeney,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that Dylan Mulvaney, and so on. So yes, so I'm a strong proponent of self-flagellation. You mentioned Clockwork Orange. It reminded me actually of something that's Stanley Kubrick. Yes.
Yeah, he did the adaptation of Burgess's novel.
Right. The reason I'm mentioning it is because Eyes Wide Shut, which
Hmm.
is one of my favorite movies, turns out to be based on a novella written in the 1920s, if I'm not mistaken, by an Austrian psychiatrist named Arthur Schlesinger or something like this. And
Hmm.
the novella is called Dream Story. The reason I'm mentioning it is because I just returned from a speaking engagement in Seattle. I went to an antiquarian bookstore, and precisely because I want to cater to the lack of fiction that I read, I asked them if they had a first edition of Dream Story. They couldn't find it for me. Are you at all familiar with that, either the movie or that work?
Yeah, I've seen the movie a few times. I like Kubrick's work a lot. I actually didn't know it was based off a novella.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right. So, as promised, now we sink into this beauty. take us through the journey. I was particularly interested, precisely to our earlier point about you doing empirical stuff. You interviewed the big five folks. You interviewed the literary agents. Talk us through the book, and then maybe we could talk about some of that empirical stuff.
Yeah, sure. So I completed my undergrad degree in English in 2012. Went on to get a master's, took some time off, taught, got my PhD in English. I've been heavily in the space of books and literary studies for the past 15 years. And I would say like early 2010s, sort of the period that people have described as the Great Awakening, when you start seeing these like weird cancellations and stuff on college campuses. You also start seeing book cancellations making the news. And I'm not using cancellation in a metaphorical sense. I'm talking literally like a book is supposed to come out next month. An advanced reader copy circulates. People accuse it of racism or sexism, and the publisher cancels the book, or they postpone the release date by 6 months and they announce they're going to send it to sensitivity readers first. In some cases, books have been quite literally pulled from Amazon, pulled from eBay. Some have never seen the light of day. So this is when I'm talking about books, I'm talking about picture books, I'm talking about memoirs, I'm talking about novels, I'm talking about journalism. There's really no corner that has been untouched. So basically, I was sort of just observing this stuff. And I would say around 2018, 2019, there were some particularly egregious examples of cancellations. Um, and basically, I was like, if this is what I know about as someone who does not work in publishing, then surely this has to be affecting things behind closed doors. Surely this has to be affecting acquisition practices, editing policies, sort of like the boardroom decisions that get made about which books to accept and et cetera. So this was around the time I was starting my PhD. So I basically set out for a few years, just interviewing people in really every corner of publishing. So from presidents and vice presidents of the five biggest publishers in the world, to editors, to agents. I even interviewed sensitivity readers, people hired to make books less offensive. I've interviewed public library directors. And basically, my book sort of summarizes what I uncovered about this sort of rampant self censorship that is going on, ostensibly in the name of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Wow. Was it difficult to get all of the survey respondents, or if it was one-on-one, whatever method you used to engage with the interviewee? Was it did it take a lot of coaxing, or were they more than happy to do so, but then gave you the proviso, please don't mention who I am or something like that?
Yeah, yeah. So again, I was trained as a qualitative sociologist. So I basically used two approaches. One, just a large random sample. That means finding as many email addresses, phone numbers as I possibly can and just cold pitching people. And like, relatively few people respond. Not just because they might be scared, but they're also like super busy people when you start trying to interview presidents, vice presidents, et cetera. So I used a random sample and then I would use what's called a snowball sample. So if I interviewed you, a president at an imprint at HarperCollins, and maybe you were like, hey, you need to talk to my colleague Jane. Let me put you in touch with her. I would use that. But for the most part, I literally reached out to hundreds of different people. And it got to the point where I even got an email from an HR person at one of the big five publishers who told me to like cease and desist from trying to get interviews with people. And, I was basically like, fuck off. You can't legally tell me to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, yeah. And then all my interviews, they're all one-on-one long form. So, to your question, the people that I did get on the phone, that I did get on Zoom, or that I did talk to in person, I would say the two dominant emotions were first and foremost, I think it was cathartic for a lot of these people. Because if you read the book, a lot of the people will say things like, I don't feel comfortable airing my skepticism about the censorship among my colleagues because I don't want to be accused of whatever, being
Right.
sympathetic to racism, to being a turf, whatever. I would say the second emotion though was just so like visceral fear. Like I'm being slightly hyperbolic when I say if you walked by my office when I was on the phone with people, I mean, you would think I was Glenn Greenwald talking to Edward Snowden, and like these people are, like these huge whistleblowers, and I'm writing the story of the century about the NSA. When in reality, I'm just talking to an editor at Penguin Random House who is like, yeah, all my colleagues want to cancel Jordan Peterson's book. I think it should be published, but I'm scared to voice that. So, I mean, in my introduction, I say, and this is true, the question that I was asked the most by all the different people I interviewed was simply a checking question, which was, I just want to double check or triple check that you will not be including my full title in this book, that you will not be including my real name, because I do not want to be on the record criticizing this stuff.
Wow. Well, I mean, this kind of plea to remain anonymous is something that I often talk about when I refer to probably the most common email that I have ever received in all my years of public engagement, which is usually, Dear Professor Saad, a whole bunch of really nice, sweet words and compliments about my work and they're a fan and so on. And then the last line is always, if you choose to read this letter on your show, please make sure to not include my name. So I understand that reflex. Are there any I understand that you didn't do sort of any statistical inferencing tests and so on because it's more qualitative and so on.
Mhm.
But in just sort of your experience, are you able to make statements? Well, amongst these different classes of people that I interviewed in the publishing world, the agents are the most woke. The acquisition editors are the most woke. The women, the female agents are more woke than the male agents. Are you
Yeah.
able to make any such conclusions?
Yeah, it's a good question. So first and foremost, I want to dispel the myth that this is only like conservative people or only white men who are saying the I call it the sensitivity era, who are saying the sensitivity era has gone too far. That's just objectively false. First, when you're talking about mainstream publishers, there are astronomically so few who identify as conservatives who actually work in this. Like, yes, there's a few imprints here and there that will publish like some big name conservative authors, but for the most part, mainstream publishing in the Northeast is overwhelmingly left of center in terms of who ends up in this industry. So I have interviewed women of color, I have interviewed people who identify as feminists who are saying, no, we should publish Jordan Peterson's book. It's a good book. I don't agree with all his beliefs, but I'm scared to say that because this person's going to accuse me of hating trans people or whatever. So I just want to be clear about that. To your point, I would say, again, anecdotally, just based off sort of the qualitative approach I took, I would say agents are the ones who are more prone to defend literary freedom and to defend their authors. Because particularly when you're talking about the agents who represent sort of the authors that sell the New York Times bestsellers, the Pulitzer Prize winners, many of these folks have been doing this for decades. And a lot of the changes that I explore are really changes from about 2010 on. So, like the number of agents who I interviewed who have been doing this for a while and are now all of a sudden in these conversations that they've never had to be in before. And they're trying to defend their authors for first and foremost. But it's the people at the publishing houses who get their foot in the door when they're, 23 years old and they just graduated from the English department at Yale and who are bringing sort of campus social justice ideology to the publishing process. So like this one woman I interviewed, for example, she's older. If you look at her client list, it really is like a who's who of contemporary literature. And she was like, I was in a conversation recently where the publishing house was saying we need to change the dialogue of a character because it is misogynistic. And she's like, yeah, I do agree it's misogynistic, but the novel's set in 1850. Like that's how they talk. And she's also like, people talk misogynistic ways in 2025. It's not like I accept what you're saying about the dialogue, but that does not logically follow that it needs to be edited. But for her, it was particularly baffling because she's been doing this since like the 60s, and now all of a sudden she has to like defend her author's right to put sexist words in a fictional character's mouth.
Amazing. Did you earlier we were talking about the distinction between fiction and nonfiction. Are you able to, make any reasonable claims as to whether the likelihood of being canceled as an author is more likely if I'm a fiction writer or nonfiction writer, or the cancellation is equal across the board?
No, it's definitely heavier in fiction, and I would say within fiction, there's certain genres that have been especially engulfed in social justice ideology. So there's a subgenre of fiction called young adult literature.
Right.
those controversies have been innumerable and really just explosive. So that's such a it's an interesting genre because it's genre written for young people, young adults, people who aren't children but aren't fully grown adults. But when you actually look at the buying data, this is overwhelmingly adults buying this material for themselves, not even for young people. But they use the excuse when they're trying to get books canceled that this is going to like corrupt young minds, that young people are like especially vulnerable, that it's different if like a 15-year-old kid reads this. So that area is sort of crazy. And for whatever reason, it also involves a lot of people who are like very online, who spend a lot of time on Twitter, especially when Tumblr was like a big site for sort of like liberal identity politics. So yeah, if you were avoiding, if you're an author who is like, I would not like to see my book censored, I'd say probably steer clear of young adult literature. Those people are absolute savages.
Two examples that speak to the central premise of your book. Number one, I actually cite this in my forthcoming book, Suicidal Empathy. It's the movie. I don't know if you saw it, but I suspect that you probably have the 2023 movie American Fiction. Have you seen that?
I've read the novel that is on which that movie's based off of. It's one of those movies it's been on the list. I just haven't got around to seeing
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah. So, but
Yeah.
I mean, just for our viewers and listeners who may not be familiar with the movie, I haven't read the book. It exactly, in a sense, speaks to what you're talking about, which is here's this black. I think he's a professor. He's a black
Hmm.
author, and he tries to write something that's pretty highbrow, as in his voice. But that's not really cool. You should be speaking in a particular black vernacular. And once he kind of scams it and starts speaking in that language, suddenly he becomes this big accepted, author because he's speaking in the true, authentic black voice, so to speak. And the other one I want to discuss, I don't know if you know this one. This came up probably after your book came out. This is straight white author's career finally takes off after he tells woke publishers he's gender queer Nigerian. Are you familiar with this case?
No, but it sounds on brand
So
for what I've
I'll
yeah.
send you the link because as I was just kind of quickly preparing for our chat, I saw this. I said, "Oh, I better put this in my book, but then I better raise it with Adam." Okay, so I'll send you that clip. A few more questions on this thing that we're talking about. Uh, I've noticed that, now maybe it's because I'm an author and therefore there's kind of a self perceptual bias or whatever. But is it wrong for me to think that almost every single movie that I watch, maybe again that's a self-selection bias, there's always a theme of an author of it's happening in the ed in, there's a book editor. Is that right? I mean, would this be something that's worthwhile to do a content analysis on? And if so, is it because there is a romantic notion of the author, the poet? Everybody wants to be an author, except I just haven't gotten around to becoming an author. Everybody wants to be a poet, but I haven't. Have you noticed that also in movies that there's kind of an over-representation of authors and publishing industry folks in films?
I haven't noticed that. No.
You
But
haven't
I'd
noticed
be
that?
curious what movies you're thinking of. I do fully agree with the second half of your point though, that when they are represented, it's often in this sort of like romantic kind of like artist whatever channeling their muse, and as
Exactly.
opposed to just I assume you're probably similar because I've talked to an innumerable number of authors over the years who, especially the prolific ones, the ones who are churning out books. Many of them just have a very blue collar relationship to their work where it's like, I wake up, I set my timer from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. and I force myself to write. Like that's how I do it. I don't, there's a quote by I think it was Somerset Maugham, I think is how you pronounce his last name. He was like, I write only when inspiration strikes. Fortunately, it strikes every morning at 9. So that's sort of like my reality. Like I sit down, set a timer. But when I watch movies and stuff, it's like, it gets a little romanticized and a little kind of like wishy-washy.
Right. So I'm glad that you sort of spoke about your routine as an author. As a young author, this is your first book. what
Mhm.
would be some advice, key pieces, prescriptive advice that you would offer someone who's listening to this chat who is exactly to my earlier question, wants to be the next author or poet? What would be three, four key lessons you'd give them?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's a book that I've really only read maybe two, three books that have like genuinely changed my life in a consequential way. One of those books is a book called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, who is a novelist. Stephen's been on Joe Rogan's podcast a few times. Joe Rogan actually used to keep a stack of that book, and he used to give it out to people.
Wow.
I've given copies to my friends who are stand-up comedians, who are graphic designers. It's a short book. You can read it in a few hours, but it's one of the books that really helped me realize that I was self-sabotaging in terms of my own aspirations to be a writer by just procrastinating, by making excuses, and there's something about the way Stephen Pressfield sort of articulates the writer's life, the artist's life, and it applies just as easy to entrepreneurs, to podcasters, whatever. It really hit home for me, and I've read that book probably every other year for the past 15 years. The more pragmatically, my own writing process. So this is my first book. Finished my second book. It's in the hands of my agent. I have a third book I'm working on. So like I have some like fair degree of, like productivity. I set an alarm every morning for 4 hours. I usually end up writing from about maybe like 7 a.m. to 11 a.m. I might write a bit longer after. But that's like I write whether I'm inspired, whether I want to write, whether I don't want to write. And even if you're only like, I would consider myself a pretty slow writer. Like I do maybe 250 words an hour. But if you just stick to that and you just do it over time, eventually you have a book. If you stick to an exercise program, do it over time, eventually you're going to lose weight. Like again, kind of like what we were talking about earlier, I think writing, painting, making music, it gets like romanticized and stuff. But if you just take a sort of basic blue collar work ethic, have some discipline, like you will get better over time. You will produce work. So that's I would be like my main advice to people.
How,
I'd be curious what your approach is. You've written
Yeah,
more
no,
books
thank you
than
for
me.
asking. I mean, there's several elements. I wholeheartedly agree with the sort of stick-to-itness, the discipline. I don't care if I'm coughing. I don't care if I'm tired. I don't care if I have bronchitis. I don't care if it seems like today my creative juices are not flowing. I need to clock in, right? To punch. What is it called? To punch in. What's the clock
Yeah,
thing?
like the time, like the old school time
The
clock,
old
just
time clock. You just gotta,
yeah,
and you gotta put it, and then, hey, close your eyes, open your eyes. You've lost, as you said, 80 pounds. Close your eyes, open your eyes. You've got a 70,000 page manuscript. Uh, it's very easy when you don't have an immediate boss to report to other than yourself to say, well, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, and then suddenly you're stuck in the procrastination loop. So I wholeheartedly agree with you that discipline is important. In my case, one of the things that I think I found has made my voice successful amongst readers is that and this may not apply to a novelist, what I'm about to say, but as a
sure,
nonfiction writer, I think being able to interweave the science, the academia, the professorial hat with impactful personal stories that bring this stuff out has really helped me. And so I remember once speaking to someone who said, I hope that the book that you write, actually, he was talking about the parasitic mind. He goes, it'd be good if you wrote it in a style that's when you appear on Joe Rogan, how you seem so approachable and you could say all the fancy stuff, but you're also funny and so on. And I
yeah,
and that's and naturally that's exactly how I like to communicate. That's why I think my voice has resonated with the trucker, with the corrections officer, with the policeman, and not just with professors at Stanford. And that's the game that I'm in, which is I'd like to convince as many minds as possible. I'm not restricting it to the Cornell ivory tower. And so
for
I
sure.
think I think that for me, that's really important. So this is maybe more advice for the nonfiction writer. Uh, I also say that having a clear roadmap. Look, writing is organic. I could show you a whole section in any book that I've ever written where a priori I didn't know that there would be this section. It came up organically as I was going through the writing process. But prior to starting writing, I had a pretty clear idea of what are the eight main things I want to say, and so having that great outline, which then the book simply becomes filling in that outline, notwithstanding the organic elements that emerge, is also very important. Would you agree with much of what I just said there?
Yeah, 100%. I have outlines for everything I write. Even if it's like 1,000 word essay, there's usually I at least have maybe one third of a Microsoft Word document with like a couple of the main points. I know my friends who are novelists and stuff, they often outline a novel in the same way, which is like act one, act two, act three. For me, it tends to just be kind of like a cyclical process. So like I might like the book I just finished, like I had most of those chapters outlined. I had research for them in my outline. But then once you start writing, right, maybe something comes up, you go back, you move things around, you adjust the outline. So like it's a combination for me of like going back and forth between what I'm writing, the outline. Maybe I might need a pause and do research or conduct interviews. So yeah, I mean but there's always at least like some roadmap I'm starting. I don't just kind of sit down and
Right.
whatever, like make words appear out of nowhere.
Are you willing, and if not, it's totally understandable. Are you willing to give us any hints about books two and three that you're working on?
I can't talk about book two as per the directions of my agent. So I'll brag at that. You will love book two. I will say that.
Oh, okay, very good.
Book three, I'm basically writing a book trying to answer the question of why so many young men in America have moved right politically.
Okay.
So yeah, that's a book that I mean, that book is I'm writing that. It reads like creative nonfiction, what I'm writing right now. Like, yes, there's research and stuff, but for the most part, it's based off my experience in jujitsu gyms, doing powerlifting competitions, and really like autobiographically coming out of like I don't know, for lack of a better word, like stereotypically male space and sort of knowing these guys very well. Mixed in with like interviews I've conducted with Theo Vaughn, Scott Galloway, like all those sorts of folks.
All right. Speaking of powerlifting, what did you think of our good friend Mamdani having difficulty with the 135 pound bench press?
This is all new to me, but
Oh, you didn't know that?
I'm immediately interested in what you're talking about. This is no, I haven't heard of this. I
Well,
did see the RFK video of him like doing pull-ups and stuff like that, but
so you may remember, and again, many thanks for the lovely gesture of putting my parasitic mind in evidence. I appreciate that. You might be the first author who was so keen with great alacrity to promote my work rather than their work on my show. So I appreciate that very kind gesture. In the parasitic mind, I talk about in one section about the links between physical formidability in men and their political and socioeconomic orientations. And perhaps not surprisingly, once I say it to you, men who are physically stronger, as measured by several different metrics, tend to be less accepting of, for example, economic egalitarianism because
interesting.
they understand that life is hierarchical, life is competitive. I'm going to go out there into the proverbial fight club, as you mentioned earlier. There'll be a winner, there'll be a loser, and that's called life. Whereas when I'm a wimpy guy with pear shaped and I cry at Bridget Jones, it's not fair. I want everything to be equal. So Mamdani, who looks like a gigantic wimp, is also a huge socialist. So I think we've just proven the theory yet again.
So explain the first part. There was a video of him struggling to lift a nominal amount of weight or
Yeah,
something.
so apparently he was, because he wants to show that he's a man of the people, he's approachable, he's just a regular guy and so on. So he's at some sort of gym or whatever it is, and he's trying to bench press 135 pounds. Now, I'm not much of a lifter, so I don't know, but it doesn't seem like it's a lot of weight.
No,
And yet
yeah.
he couldn't sort of do it. The guy that's spotting him had to help him. And so that became kind of a big scandal of what a wimp he is.
Yeah, so like I mean like one of the things I'm super interested in now is like the overlay of like fitness culture, male podcast culture, and like people, young men casting their votes for Trump, for whoever. And it's like I don't think you need a PhD in sociology from Harvard to like look at that and then look at like RFK is like 70 years old, jacked, hot wife, doing pull-ups, talking about like men should persevere, men should be strong. Same thing you see in like Jordan Peterson and Rogan. Like I don't think you need to study at Harvard for 6 years to like understand which side might be more appealing to like an 18-year-old dude. Like,
But forgive me for interrupting you, but as you probably know, the Democrats recently hired some consultants and I think paid
yeah, it was
$20 million,
20 million.
20 million exactly, to help them understand how to speak to young men. I mean,
I
just
would do it for $400. If they paid me 400,
I
I'd get
would
to
do
the
it
bottom
for a
of it.
tomahawk steak. Wow. I mean, just the fact that you commissioned that study, never mind paying $20 million, that itself is proof why, if I'm a male, I should never vote for your party, no?
Yeah, it's insane. It's kind of like that movie The Manchurian Candidate where
Uh,
they like they're trying to create like the Manchurian Joe Rogan. But I think there's a like I don't think you can have sort of like say I'm just using Joe Rogan as an example. I don't think you can have that in the way that they want to have it because I think at its core there's a certain element of masculinity that revolves around strength and transgression. And so like I don't know how you would like create that. So I mean it's probably going to be like a lot of liberal nonprofits, which is like certain liberals make a shitload of money and it in no way, shape, or form helps them
well,
electorally.
I'm gonna link what you just said about masculinity and some of the bro stuff with the A word, authenticity, right? So
For sure.
Joe Rogan, Donald Trump, Elon Musk, they have ascended to the apex of their respective pursuits because as that book, I don't remember who the author is, but you know the subtle art of not giving an F. Remember
Yeah,
that book?
Mark Manson, I
Oh,
think.
is that what it is? Okay.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, what is he saying there? I present myself to the world and I don't care. That doesn't mean I'm impolite. That doesn't mean I don't have social grace. But when I take my positions, they're never modulated. And I mean, I'm speaking now about me. I'm authentic to a fault. I simply can't modulate because if I modulate, I feel as though I'm being a fraud. I'm being fraudulent. Therefore, I present myself to the world. You like it, great. You don't like it, F off. I don't give a shit, right?
for
And
sure.
and if you look at each of these guys that I just mentioned, I think they all exude that. And that's, I don't mean to be stereotypical, but to some extent, that's a very desired, sexy male attribute because it demonstrates self-assuredness and self-confidence. And certainly when we ask women, what is one of the things that you find most sexy about a man, they'll say self-confidence. So if I have the self-confidence to be my authentic self and never worry about how to modulate, then I'm sexy.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, like thinking about authenticity, I know people were like busting Rogan's balls because he had Trump on before the election. He didn't have on Kamala Harris, but it's like, dude, he invited Kamala on. Kamala didn't go on. And like the way he tells it, and I have no reason to doubt him, he's like, Kamala's team was like, we want you to send us the questions ahead of time. We're gonna have a stenographer in the room. We want you to come out to DC. We want to do it for 50 minutes, not more than 50. And he's like, Trump, it was one email. Like, do you want to come on the podcast? Sure. And the guy comes on for 3 hours. And again, like independent of whether you agree with his politics, whether you like his personality or not, at least you know who he is. Like that's him. Whereas with the Democrats, they have not done a good job of sort of shucking the sort of like the constant like liberal elite cosmetics that it seems like touches everything. I think the California guy, Gavin Newsom, is
Oh
like
my God, the lizard.
attempting to do that by like trying to be funny and like confrontational. But because he hasn't been doing that, it just seems like I don't know, some of that 20 million, like a few 100,000 went to someone who's like writing his tweets now.
But speaking about Trump accepting, after one email, whatever, uh, I have a similar story. So I know Elon Musk well and so on. And when we've only had one X Spaces chat together so far, although we had planned on doing more. And the day before we ended up having the X Spaces, we were communicating by email. And so I had written to him and I said, hey, so Elon, let me know, check your schedule, expecting that, of course, he's infinitely busy, right? And let me know, when you'd like to hold it. And so the next morning, it's Sunday. I think I sent it on a Saturday night or something. The next morning, I wake up. I'm at the coffee shop, just planning on taking an easy day, and I have a reply from Elon, which I only read on Sunday morning, saying, "Oh, let's do it today," meaning right. So there was no checking his schedule. And I thought, how refreshing is that? No pretense, no bullshit, no drama, no pass it through my 17 layers of checkers first. It's like two guys, let's have fun, let's chat. And so I wholeheartedly agree. All right, what are some things that uh, as you were doing the research for this book, surprised you to no ends that you wouldn't have expected that the results would come out this way, or if any?
Yeah, so one thing that was very surprising to me, so there's a part of the book where I talk about social experiments that I ran at Cornell with actual readers. So for these experiments, I worked with a couple other sociologists at Cornell, both of whom have a level of math genius that I do not possess, and they came on the project, helped me out. But basically, the super spark notes version of what we did is we had two groups of readers and we gave each group four poems, and the groups would read the poems and then they would have 16 word choices and to describe the poem, so they could click this poem was well written, poorly written, progressive, racist, anti-racist. They had to pick three, right? So we used three poems that had been accused of transgressions in the real world of racism, sexism, whatever, and then we used one poem that was just a random poem that had not. And in the first group, what we found, and these were not college students, we used, I think we used MTurk, if I remember. So just a random sample of US adults, approximating a nationally representative sample. And what we found was like normal people reading this stuff, it was like 95% of them are not accusing these poems of racism and sexism and stuff. They were just like, this is a good poem, this is a bad poem, whatever. The second group, same thing. We gave them these poems, but I wrote criticism as a Confederate, so like pretending to be a
Right.
literary critic. And I just wrote two sentences for each poem, but the sentences were very critical. So it would be like, this poem is so racist, it does like real damage to the African American community. This poem is so sexist, it reduces women to like animals or something. And then we also told these readers that after the experiment, they would be asked to log into their Facebook profile and they'd be part of a live discussion about the poem. So like people would know the veil of anonymity was removed. They would have to justify their responses. And the number of people accusing this literature of racism, of sexism, of homophobia, it just absolutely shot up. So from like about 0% in the control group to about like 30% or more in the other group. And the craziest thing was I used a poem that had not been accused of anything bad. It's this poem called The Supermarket in California by Allen Ginsberg, who is like a far left poet active in the 60s. He's a gay guy.
Yeah.
He's anthologized in the Columbia Anthology of Gay Literature. Like liberals, progressives, Marxists, like they love Allen Ginsberg. His poem is just about grocery shopping, but we gave it to people and we said that a famous literary critic had accused it of harmful homophobia and like demeaning the gay community. And we got about like 35% of people to click homophobic when they were evaluating his poem. And so I left that experiment and I was like, this social pressure that we tried to create in our lab, it doesn't even remotely approximate like the real social pressure that people have, especially if you're one of those people who's like writing book reviews for the New York Review of Books or Vice or Salon, and you're like in that hyper liberal space where like everyone needs to toe the line. So I came out of that experiment and I was like, to what extent are these book controversies when you see like a book getting 5,000 bad tweets on X or like 2,000 heinous reviews on Goodreads? To what extent is this just people trying to fit in with their liberal peers. And my interviews would confirm that it's actually probably a big extent. Like I remember interviewing one agent who said that one of her authors got attacked, got called whatever, a misogynist, a racist. And one of her friends who also worked in publishing was like, what is happening to your author is so terrible. Like, these are just groundless accusations. But then she's like, my friend actually liked one of the attacks on Twitter. And I asked them, I was like, what is that about? Like, you said this was bullshit. And she's like, my friend was like, if I don't click like, if I don't support this, they're gonna say I'm just being a bystander. Silence is violence. So that was, there's a lot of things that interested me, sort of surprised me, but that was one where I was like, Jesus, like this actually does seem like lemmings just like following each other off a cliff.
Two points to address what you just described. Number one, I so love the fact that you are using the experimental method to test some of these ideas. Again, to our earlier point, you could use a scientific approach to study something like literature. Along the same line, that's still part of my first point. I recently returned from a conference at the University of Buckingham in England, where the conference was as far as I know, the first academic anti-woke conference. It was organized by Professor Eric Kaufman, who recently returned on my show a couple of weeks ago. He's a political scientist by training, but a huge anti-woke professor. And he has called, as part of something that he calls the Buckingham Declaration, which I'm a signatory of, that we have to study these woke issues empirically. And so the study that you just described, using, a control group and an experimental group and so on, totally fits within this. So if it ends up being that you're hoping to publish this empirical study, please reach out to me and I'll see if I can connect you with him, because what you've done there seems to be well in line with what, he's hoping to pioneer as a new field of study. So that's number one. Number two, you're finding that most people are mindless sheep that just, conform to group pressures, is literally, in my view, arguably the key finding in maybe the three most famous experiments in psychology. I'll only mention one here. Are you familiar with the Solomon Asch group conformity experiments?
For sure, yeah, it's been replicated like across countries and at a time when other social science research has not been replicated like
Exactly.
at all. So yeah.
And so in that case, I know you know it, but maybe some of our listeners and viewers don't. You basically take a single line, call it X, and then you put three lines A, B, C, one of which is the exact same length as X, and it's absolutely clear which one that is. In other words, you'd have to literally be congenitally blind to not be able to see that line B is the same length as line X. But the point of the experiment is to see what happens if you can get a bunch of Confederates, exactly as you had done in your experiment. So this is someone who is I mean, he's not really in the experiment, but he's pretending to be
Mhm.
a participant. If I put eight people and I ask them, can you please tell me which of these three lines is the same length as the line X here? If they give what is clearly the wrong answer, can you get the final person who's the real subject, unbeknownst to him, not knowing that the other are Confederates, can you get him to conform? And now, of course, the reason why that experiment was so powerful, number one, it's a very simple design that you could explain to a 10-year-old. You don't have to have convoluted experimental designs to demonstrate something about human nature. But number two, if you can take something as black and white, right? This is not sort of gray stimulus. This is very clear which is the correct one. And if I can still get a number greater than zero, never mind that in his case he got a lot more than zero, to kind of nod their head and go against their lying eyes, then it doesn't surprise me that in the more amorphous gray world of the group dynamics of political correctness, that there's such pressure on people to just conform and press that like button, as you said.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, you're absolutely right. In terms of your question, like another thing, so this wasn't necessarily surprising to me, but it was surprising to some other people who were kind of like early readers for the manuscript. So I think some people had a conception that, um, it's one thing for like if you're an intern at HarperCollins or Penguin Random House, or maybe you're fresh out of undergrad, this is your first job, that you would kind of just tote the line, right? Like you're in an economically precarious situation, you want to make it. But like senior figures would be sort of more prone to like speak their minds, to have a spine, like people who've been there for decades, have high incomes, have status, power. But in my interviews, like I mean, I literally interviewed people at like sort of the top of the top, like not just the best publishers, but presidents, vice presidents, people who've been there for a while, people who make, from my understanding, really, really good money, and live in Manhattan. And even some of these people, like, just directly told me that they would not push back on accusations or editing policies that they thought were insane or wrong, or no, this is not racist. No, this is not sexist. And it was difficult for me to hear because on the one hand, yeah, I understand where you're coming from. Like, you don't want the pitchforks to be turned towards you. You don't want to be called someone who's like a racist sympathizer or turf or whatever. Like, you don't want to be posted about by your colleagues on X. Like, I get that. I understand it. But at the same time, it's like, come on, man. Like, you're a grown ass fucking man. Like, just say that you think it's stupid that you're not publishing this book because, some 25-year-old who you hired 6 months ago said it was like sexist or something. In that situation, I'm like, this is more your realm, but I'm like, is this someone just like who needs to get blood work done? Like, does he have like super low testosterone levels? Like, what if that was just like a major explanation for kind of like wokeness and stuff? Because it's the same thing you see on campus, right? Like when you watch that fucking video of Evergreen State College when there was that uproar over Brett Weinstein,
Yeah.
and those kids are holding the university president like essentially hostage in a classroom, and they're in his face, they're screaming at him. And at one point this guy says he has to go to the bathroom. This is a grown ass man, and one of the students says, you're not going anywhere, like you're gonna hold it, and if you go to the bathroom, we're sending someone to escort you. And the president at this point had already told the campus police to like stand down, and he's like, I need to go to the bathroom. And I'm just like, again, does this guy have like some sort of hormonal imbalance or something? And again, there's probably a big class element to this, like Evergreen State College, selective liberal arts college. If you went into like, the neighborhood where my gym is, it's bodybuilding, powerlifting gym, a lot of like working class guys there. If you get in a grown man's face, especially as like a 18-year-old kid, and you tell him to like shut his mouth and that he's not going to go to the bathroom, like that would you get your teeth knocked out like immediately. Like that's not. But I don't know. I guess if you've spent your life going to an elite boarding school and you end up at Evergreen State College and you're used to talking to professionals in like a condescending, demanding way, and your president is an absolute spineless cretin who just wants to make the customer happy, then I guess that's like how business works.
Well, of course, you are exactly speaking my language and my reality and my ecosystem. Couple of points. Number one, while yes, it is, I fully understand your ire at having these super senior presidents be afraid to say, come on, what kind of publishing edict is this? How about professors who have tenure? So institutionally, the reason why you have tenure is so that in case you were a sniveling coward, we can hopefully compel you to be courageous and speak your mind about anything without having the fear of being fired. That's why we have tenure. Yet I'm here to tell you, Adam, although I suspect you probably know it already, that there is no group of people that is more cowardly. You said spineless. So you may or may not have heard me mention the term that I have discovered a new biological species. They're called professors, and they're known by the scientific term the invertebrate castrati, because not only do they not have spines, they don't have balls. And I don't care if you're male or female or any of the 873 other sexes and genders, you all share one thing. You have a progressive lisp, you're wimpy, you're cowardly, you're afraid of your shadow, which, by the way, that's one of the reasons why. I mean, paradoxically why I have such a large platform, because the corrections officer and the military sniper love me because they do have high testosterone,
Mhm.
but why I don't get invited to many of the cool kids progressive academic parties, because I'm a mean brute. I don't know how this guy went on to get all these fancy degrees at McGill and Cornell, because he should be speaking with a progressive lisp rather than his mean Middle Eastern way. He's so vulgar, right? So, and that has been, in a sense, for me, an existential, fracture in my life, because I love academia like no one has ever loved academia. To be a professor is in my DNA, but I despise most academics because they're these little sniveling, wimpy cowards. Now, it could well be because just by the luck of random combination of genes, I have high testosterone. It also is, by the way, and I'm being here literal, the fact that I was a competitive athlete, right? You can't be a competitive soccer player and be a whiny girl, right? You have to step into the ring. I remember something that Joe Rogan told me the first time that I went on his show. He said, between the MMA fights that he's into that world and his stand-up comic and my professorial stuff, there is something in common. I said, "Oh, what is that, Joe?" He said, "Well, if you step into an arena to fight, you can't hide. If you get up in front of an audience as a stand-up comic and you suck, you can't hide. If, in your case, God, if you come on the show or you do all of your public engagement and you say something bullshit, you can't hide. So you have to be kind of a larger than life person to be able to do this. That's why most academics can't go on Joe Rogan, because they know they're very, very narrow lane where they could talk about the specific tiny little thing that they know about, but they don't have the self-assuredness to pontificate about all kinds of other things. Have I kind of put it
Yeah.
all together in a package?
Yeah, no, I agree with you down the line. And I think one of the reasons I'm probably drawn to your work, drawn to I think some of the kind of like younger guys around my age, like Rob Henderson, who
Yes.
went to Cambridge. What this isn't like a requirement for good scholarship, but I do find like a lot of the scholars I gravitate towards are people who have, like absolute intellectual credibility, like a really acute research eye. But they often come from like non-traditional backgrounds. And by non-traditional, I don't just mean Rob Henderson, who went to foster care, or even like me, like no one in my family went to college, like my dad was in the military. But also people who come from like certain competitive sports backgrounds. Like I can say I've never met another PhD student who is competing in powerlifting before starting PhD. If I started talking like some of my colleagues at a powerlifting meet, people would probably have no idea what the fuck I'm even talking about. Or two, if they actually got to what I'm talking about, they'd just be like, "Why are you such a weird pussy?" or something like that, or like, "You need therapy." So, but when you have like these, and frankly, there's not a lot of them. People who like slip through the cracks and end up getting a PhD, and even like slip further through where they get a tenure track job, get tenure. You end up like, there's a reason you have millions of people reading your work, because in many ways you are sort of an outlier. And I don't think your personal background, it doesn't sound like that's entirely like incidental to the kinds
Right.
of questions you're interested in, how you go about those questions, the fact that you are willing to withstand social ostracization, the various other things like, as you put it, like there's a reason you're not going to be invited to speak at certain departments or what have you. And it's really unfortunate because there's probably people listening right now, especially if you're like an undergrad and you look at the intellectual life and there's so much that is gratifying about it. Like I really enjoyed my
Yes.
time at Cornell. Like I had 2 years of fellowship where I could just read and write, and that was my life. And it's awesome for people who like to think and sit around reading hundreds of books every year. But on the other hand, like quite frankly, sort of the last people on earth that I would want to spend my free time with are intellectuals. So
Yeah, no, I hear you. Just to intergenerationally link Rob Henderson with someone much older, but that fits that mold, Victor Davis Hanson would be one such character, right? Because he does have impeccable academic credentials. I mean, he was a professor for many years. He's a Hoover Institution fellow. He's a PhD in classics from Stanford, but he's also a farmer, Adam, right? So this is a guy who's no, but did you know
Yeah,
that
yeah.
about him? I'm,
No, no, I didn't.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not
Yeah.
familiar with him, but yeah,
Oh,
I
Victor
don't know
Davis
any
Hanson, for
farmers.
anybody who's
Yeah.
not, yeah, anybody who's listening to us and doesn't know him, go down that rabbit hole. I mean, he's a guy who could, pull up a link between some ancient Greek philosopher and some contemporary issue, and then the next minute he'll explain to you how he uses the
Yeah.
irrigation system on his farm. I'm like, that's the kind of cool guy I want to hang around with, right? That's the guy who can fix the flat tire if we had to have a someone fix the flat tire. But I want to kind of wrap that part of the our conversation, linking it to you. All that we've said about some of our respective disdain for many of the academics, does that mean that if today, I know that you might be boxed out of academia because you did the unthinkable in writing such a book and you may not get a professorship, but if tomorrow you were to get Smith College or whatever, some university or
Yeah.
college to offer you that assistant professorship, would you take it? Would you be interested, or have you already made the decision? I want to be with the power lifters. I don't want to be with the intellectual wimps.
Yeah, no, I've already made my decision. I have, so I obviously write, and I'm fortunate enough where I have an agent and can make money off my books and whatnot. I have a job in addition to this. I can tell you about it off camera. It's fucking amazing.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, like there, I don't see myself ever going back to academia. I will give university, I'm giving a few campus talks. I'm actually giving one at I think Ole Miss or someone who's also hosting you because they told me to say hi. I'm not doing a good job. I'm forgetting the university and the institute. But
Well, I'm not at liberty to say anything,
okay.
but there are links between me and Old Miss that people will find out about shortly.
Yeah, I think it's Ole Miss. Anyways, I'm
It
happy to
is.
come to campus,
Yeah.
happy to come to campus, especially sort of like the heterodox academy people who have, a place on certain campuses. But the idea of having to be around academics for the rest of my life, particularly in like an English department, is profoundly unappealing to me. Also, like, even if someone was like, NYU calls me and they're like, "Hey, we're giving you that R1 position. You get to live in Greenwich Village, like a place I would love to live." At the end of the day, I don't really want to be reading, 18-year-old kids papers for the rest of my life. Especially like the last time I taught was spring 2023, and I was already noticing because I teach writing and English and cultural studies, like heavy essay grounded disciplines, and I was already noticing like the chat GPT and that sort of stuff. So, I've enjoyed a lot of things about teaching. I don't have like a personal gripe against teaching. Won a teaching award at Cornell. I have a lot of students I've connected with. But at the end of the day, like I just, me personally, I don't know if that's really like the best path for me in terms of how I want to use
Well,
my
I'm
time.
now really eager to end this interview so that I could know off camera what your awesome job is. Anything that you want to discuss beyond the books 2 and 3 that you're currently working on? Any other projects that you'd like to promote before we wrap it up?
No, I'll promote your book up here. I like
And
that a
I'll do the
lot.
same with yours. Guys, go out there. It came out August 12th. Fantastic book. Go out and order it now. All right. Adam, it's such a pleasure to meet you and chat with you. I can't wait to check out books 2 and 3 and to find out off camera what you're not an adult film star, are you? No.
I'm not. No, no, I'm not.
All right. A real pleasure having you on the show. Stay on the line so we could chat.
Sounds good.
Talk to you soon. Take care.
Thank
Cheers.
you.